Mayor Pete Buttigieg, the Democratic candidate for president. Thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Well, thanks for having me.
Utah's economy is the strongest in the nation. We tie with South Carolina, Vermont in the lowest unemployment. We've got a highly educated workforce, relatively low taxes, excellent health care available. We've got a business environment that attracts some of the best companies in the world. If you become president, what can you do for the people of Utah?
Well, my definition of a good economy is one where everyone is able to thrive. And yet the U.S. is lagging most developed countries in terms of everything from maternal mortality to many recent years life expectancy actually going down in the United States. To me, the measure of a good economy is not only numbers on a page, it's whether Americans are able to afford the cost of health care, prescription drugs, education, saving for retirement, and it's clear we've got a lot of work to do. So in order to have an economy that truly works for us, I believe we need to begin measuring economic performance, above all other things, by the income growth of the 90%. And that means making sure we raise wages, empower workers, and have a fairer tax code so that you don't see multi-billion-dollar corporations paying zero in federal income taxes while families are struggling to get ahead.
In the latest poll, which came out before Iowa and before New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders led you here in Utah 27 to 5%. Most of his support comes from young people. Now, if a 78-year-old self-proclaimed social democrat can do that well among Utah's young people, what does a 38-year-old moderate Democratic candidate have to do to make up the difference?
Well, here's my message to progressives and young people. I would be the most progressive president we've had in the last half century. And the longer you're planning to be here, the more you have at stake in a bunch of decisions that are about to be made about everything from climate to how our economy is going to unfold. But I'm offering a way to do it that can actually bring more Americans together. We are already a dangerously polarized country. And for any of these big ideas to actually get done, we're going to have to mobilize an American majority that already wants a lot of big solutions, but can be alienated by a message that says that your only two options are between a revolution and the status quo. That's a picture that most Americans don't see themselves in. I'm offering a different picture, and I think that's part of what explains why we've been able to beat the polls, the pundits, and the expectations in this race so far.
Land management is a big issue here in the Mountain West, Utah especially. There seems to be a constant struggle between the federal government and the state government over protecting federal land and mining and development versus mining and development. How do you see that relationship going forward?
Well, so much of Utah's land is public land, and public land is a trust not just between governments, but between generations. It's about preserving land for the future. It's why I believe that we need to have very strong protections to ensure that short-term economic desire doesn't overpower the need to make sure that these resources are preserved through the generations. There will always be a natural tug of war between state, local, and federal authorities making sure we get to the right answers. What I believe is that we should set a floor at the federal level for the protection of lands and for environmental standards, and then work with state and local governments to decide what makes the most sense in different ways in different states.
Utah is flanked on either side by states where recreational marijuana is legal. Medical marijuana is legal in Utah. Is it time, do you think, to take marijuana off the Schedule I narcotics list?
I believe it is. We've seen so many cases where incarceration of people for possession of marijuana has done far more harm than any offense that it was intended to deal with. And at a time when the country is taking this step, I think the time has arrived for the federal government to stop complicating the progress that states are making and legalize this at the federal level and pay attention to the harms that have been done and help people who were caught up in this war on drugs get back on their feet.
Utah has been a red state for a long, long time. The last presidential candidate to win Utah was Lyndon Johnson. Why do you think that is, and what can you do about it?
Well, I think there's no such thing as a permanently red state. My own home state of Indiana hadn't voted for a Democrat since Lyndon Johnson until Barack Obama came along. And I think across the country, a lot of people are wondering whether the Republican Party has left them, if they're feeling that way. A lot of independents, right-leaning independents, and future former Republicans, as I like to call them, I want to make sure they feel welcome in the movement we're building. We're not going to agree on everything, but I think most of us can agree that we can do better than this White House today.
Northern Utah's air quality is among some of the worst in the nation, especially during the winter. But we're not the only place that has problems with that. If you become president, how will you clean up the air?
Well, this president has rolled back protections on air and water that keep us and children safe. I will move in the other direction. We need to have reasonable but rigorous regulation to ensure that air and water is clean. This is a responsibility that we have in terms of public health, and again, a responsibility to future generations too. And I will appoint leadership in the Environmental Protection Agency that actually believes in protecting the environment.
When you look back at every Democratic president over the last half century, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama, not in that order, but when you look back, each one of them came from a long shot position. What does that tell you about your chances of actually leading the free world?
Well, it's very encouraging for us. And I think it's important for Democrats to consider, who above all else just want to make sure we win in November, that every time we've actually won, it's been with a nominee who is opening the door to a new generation of leadership who came from outside Washington and who was calling the country to its highest values. I think that is not only the right way to win, I think it's the best way to govern.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Democratic presidential candidate, thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Same here. Great to be with you.